Admiral Helen Brooks sat in her office deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, reading Jake Morrison's classified report for the third time, and feeling her understanding of galactic politics shift like sand beneath her feet as each page revealed new impossibilities that challenged everything Earth's government believed about their alien neighbors. The data Pete Williams had copied from the ancient station filled 17 terabytes of storage with files that seemed to grow more detailed. The longer human researchers studied them as if the information was alive and responding to their curiosity, in ways that made the translation teams nervous about what they might discover next. Dr. Carl Jensen was Earth's leading expert on galactic history, but he found himself questioning decades of research when the Alliance records showed that every major historical event he had studied was either completely wrong or deliberately falsified by sources the Council had provided to human scholars. Working alongside linguist Dr. Nina Walsh, he began the massive task of translating documents that seemed to shift between languages depending on who was reading them with human minds, somehow able to understand concepts that had been designed for species with completely different ways of thinking. The Alliance files described a galactic civilization built on principles that sounded remarkably similar to human democratic ideals, with elected representatives from hundreds of species working together to solve problems through cooperation, rather than the hierarchical control systems that currently dominated known space. Nina discovered that many of the symbols found throughout Alliance ruins matched patterns in ancient human cave paintings and stone carvings, suggesting that humanity's ancestors had somehow been in contact with the Alliance thousands of years before developing space travel. Intelligence operative Kelly Murphy had been working undercover on Council worlds for 5 years, gathering information about alien political systems. But nothing had prepared her for what she found when she began searching for references to the First Alliance in official archives. Her contacts in the Council bureaucracy led her to classified files on Proxima Station that revealed humanity was considered a dangerous anomaly by the ruling powers, because human governmental structures too closely resembled the Forbidden Alliance model that had been eradicated from official history. Documents Kelly accessed showed that the Council was actually controlled by only 3 species who called themselves the Eternal Triumvirate, and who had systematically eliminated dozens of other civilizations over thousands of years, while convincing younger species that they were preventing chaos and protecting galactic stability. Dr. Ryan Clark led the team analyzing Alliance technology samples that Pete had managed to smuggle back from the station, and found that the power systems operated on principles of shared energy distribution rather than centralized control, with each component designed to support the whole rather than dominating other parts. The technological philosophy embedded in Alliance devices seemed to mirror their political structure, with every system designed to enhance cooperation and prevent any single element from gaining too much power over others, which explained why Council scientists had been unable to understand or reproduce these technologies. Helen Brooks realized that the implications went far beyond simple historical revision. When she read reports showing that the Council had been deliberately limiting human expansion by providing faulty star charts and steering human colonies away from resource-rich systems while claiming to be helping humanity develop safely. Kelly Murphy's investigation revealed that similar manipulation had been used against dozens of species, with the Council maintaining power by keeping potential rivals weak and isolated, while presenting themselves as benevolent guides protecting primitive civilizations from the dangers of unrestricted growth. Carl Jensen found evidence in the Alliance records that many current Council member species had once been powerful, independent civilizations with advanced technologies and rich cultures before being conquered and reduced to their current dependent status through a combination of military action and genetic manipulation. The files described how the Triumvirate had used engineered diseases to weaken resistant populations, followed by propaganda campaigns that convinced survivors they needed Council protection from the very threats the Council had created, leading to voluntary submission by civilizations too devastated to resist. Nina Walsh discovered that each conquered species had been assigned specific roles in the Council hierarchy, with some designated as warriors, others as workers, and still others as bureaucrats, in a system designed to prevent any group from developing the diverse skills needed for independence. Ryan Clark's analysis revealed that Alliance technology was not just more advanced than current Council systems, but was based on completely different principles that assumed cooperation and shared resources rather than scarcity and competition, making it incompatible with the control mechanisms the triumvirate used to maintain power. The research teams found references to other Alliance survivors hidden throughout the galaxy in systems marked as forbidden zones or dangerous regions that the Council warned all species to avoid, but which the Alliance records indicated were actually refugee settlements established by fleeing populations. Kelly Murphy used her intelligence network to verify some of these locations, and found that many supposedly empty systems contained traces of recent activity, including energy signatures that matched Alliance technology patterns, suggesting that remnants of the original civilization might still exist in hiding. Helen Brooks convened a secret meeting of Earth's senior leadership to discuss what humanity should do with this information, knowing that revealing the truth about galactic history would mark Earth as an enemy of the Council, but that keeping silent would mean abandoning billions of beings living under tyrannical rule. The decision to act came when Kelly Murphy intercepted Council communications discussing something called the Final Protocol, which appeared to be a plan to eliminate humanity entirely, once human space technology advanced enough to pose a potential threat to triumvirate control. Pete Williams had been quietly working on adapting Alliance technology principles to human systems and discovered that human engineering approaches were naturally compatible with Alliance designs in ways that suggested humanity might be descended from Alliance refugees who had reached Earth millennia ago. The possibility that humans were themselves descendants of the first Alliance explained why human democratic ideals posed such a threat to Council authority, and why the triumvirate had been so careful to limit human development while appearing to support it. Nina Walsh found linguistic evidence supporting this theory when she discovered that ancient human languages contained root words that matched Alliance terminology for concepts like freedom, justice, and cooperation in patterns that could not be explained by coincidence. Carl Jensen's historical analysis revealed that human civilization had experienced several mysterious leaps in development at points that corresponded with Alliance refuge missions mentioned in the recovered files, suggesting that human ancestors had received technological and cultural assistance from Alliance survivors. The implications were staggering, because if humanity was descended from Alliance refugees, then humans had a legitimate claim to the democratic traditions the Council had spent thousands of years trying to erase from galactic memory. Helen Brooks authorized Kelly Murphy to make contact with suspected Alliance survivor communities using communication protocols found in the ancient files, while Ryan Clark began developing human versions of Alliance technologies that could be shared with potential allies. The decision to reach out to other survivors marked the beginning of humanity's transformation, from an isolated species struggling to understand galactic politics to the catalyst for a revolution that would either restore freedom to the galaxy or result in the complete destruction of Earth and everything humans had built among the stars. Kelly Murphy stepped off the transport shuttle onto the rocky surface of Kepler 186b, wearing the disguise of a Council trade inspector, but carrying hidden communication devices loaded with Alliance contact protocols that she hoped would reach someone who remembered the old ways before the triumvirate had rewritten galactic history. The mining colony looked like thousands of others throughout Council space, with gray industrial buildings and workers moving like broken machines through their daily routines, but Kelly had learned to look beyond surface appearances for signs that some species retained fragments of their original cultures, despite centuries of oppression. Her contact was supposed to be a Zentorian named Thane Korvac, who worked in the deep mines extracting rare metals for Council shipbuilding, but who had been sending coded messages through underground networks that suggested he knew more about pre-Council history than any member of his species was supposed to remember. The meeting took place in an abandoned mining tunnel 3 kilometers below the surface, where the Council's surveillance systems could not reach, and where the sound of drilling equipment would mask their conversation from any listening devices that might have been planted. Thane Korvac was a massive being with gray skin and 4 arms, who moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to dangerous work. But his eyes held an intelligence that Council propaganda claimed his species lacked, and when he spoke, it was with words that carried the weight of hidden knowledge. He told Kelly that his people preserved their true history in songs passed down through generations, disguised as work chants that Council overseers dismissed as primitive noise, but which actually contained detailed accounts of Zentorian civilization before their conquest. and enslavement. The songs described a time when Centaurians were master engineers and philosophers who built cities that floated among the clouds of gas giants and who developed technologies for shaping matter at the molecular level. But the Council had reduced them to manual laborers and convinced the galaxy that they were naturally suited for physical work. Thane had been collecting Alliance artifacts for decades, finding fragments in asteroid mines and deep excavations that his supervisors ignored because they did not match any known technology patterns, but which his people's songs identified as remnants. From the time before the Great Forgetting, Kelly showed him the files Pete Williams had copied from the ancient station and watched Thane's face change as he recognized symbols and concepts that matched the hidden verses his grandmother had taught him as a child when she thought no Council agents were listening. The Alliance records confirmed what Centaurian songs had preserved through centuries of oppression, that his people had been founding members of the original Democratic Federation, and that their forced labor was punishment for refusing to surrender their independence when the Triumvirate seized power. Together they traveled to other worlds where Kelly made contact with resistance cells that had been operating in isolation for generations, believing they were the only ones who questioned Council authority and who preserved fragments of forbidden knowledge. On the agricultural world of Kepler 452, she met with Dr. Maya Patel, a human xenobiologist who had discovered that many supposedly primitive species actually possessed sophisticated understanding of genetics and ecology that Council science dismissed as instinctual behavior. Maya had been secretly documenting evidence that these species retained knowledge from Alliance educational systems that had been far more advanced than current Council institutions, but which had been suppressed to prevent conquered populations from developing the skills needed for independence. The underground network grew as Kelly shared Alliance historical records with resistance leaders who found that their isolated struggles were actually part of a galaxy-wide pattern of oppression that had been hidden by careful manipulation of information and the elimination of anyone who asked too many questions. Dr. Lisa Carter led expeditions to Alliance ruins that Kelly's contacts had identified on worlds throughout Council space, finding intact libraries and research facilities that had been overlooked because Council archaeologists were trained to ignore anything that did not fit official historical narratives. The ruins on Vega Prime contained the most complete Alliance archive yet discovered, with records showing how the Triumvirate had used engineered plagues to weaken resistant populations, followed by psychological manipulation campaigns that convinced survivors they needed Council protection from threats the Council itself had created. Dan Brooks, back on Earth, developed quantum communication systems based on Alliance technology principles that allowed the growing resistance network to coordinate across vast distances without Council detection, while appearing to use standard commercial frequencies. The network expanded to include sympathizers from 17 different species as more groups learned that their histories of conquest and cultural destruction followed identical patterns, suggesting careful planning rather than the random conflicts. Council propaganda described Captain Jake Morrison took the UES Horizon on missions that appeared routine to Council observers, but which actually involved distributing Alliance historical data to resistance cells and evacuating researchers who had discovered too much about pre-Council civilizations. Each species that learned the truth about their heritage began recovering suppressed cultural elements and technological innovations that their ancestors had developed, but which Council education systems had trained them to forget or dismiss as primitive superstitions. The Council's suspicions were aroused when routine intelligence reports began mentioning increased activity among species that were supposed to be docile and compliant, leading to the deployment of Inquisitor Vex Malachar to investigate what the Triumvirate feared might be the beginning of organized resistance. Malachar was a member of the hegemony species that served as the Council's primary enforcement arm, but he had begun noticing inconsistencies in official records and questioning orders that seemed designed to suppress knowledge rather than maintain stability. His investigation led him to intercept communications between resistance cells and to capture Alliance artifacts that challenged everything he had been taught about galactic history and the noble mission of Council civilization. The evidence was overwhelming when he compared Alliance records with classified Council files that he had access to as an Inquisitor, because the records showed that his own species had been manipulated and genetically modified by the Triumvirate to serve as enforcers against their will. Malachar discovered that hegemony warriors were descended from a peaceful species of scholars and artists who had been transformed through forced genetic modification into aggressive enforcers who felt compelled to serve the council, even when they questioned its methods. The revelation shattered his understanding of his own identity and purpose, leading him to question whether his loyalty belonged to the triumvirate that had created him as a weapon, or to the truth about what his people had been before their transformation. Lisa Carter's team discovered Alliance facilities that contained genetic templates for dozens of species, showing their original forms before council modification, and proving that most current species characteristics were artificial traits imposed by the triumvirate to make them more suitable for their assigned roles. The Resistance Network reached a critical point when 17 different species simultaneously began remembering suppressed knowledge and recovering technologies that the Council had spent centuries trying to eliminate from galactic civilization. Kelly Murphy coordinated with Resistance leaders to plan a galaxy-wide revelation that would expose the truth about the First Alliance and Council crimes against billions of beings. But they knew that success would mean war, while failure would mean extinction for everyone involved. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether the democratic principles preserved in human civilization and Alliance records could overcome thousands of years of tyrannical rule, or whether the triumvirate would succeed in eliminating the last threats to their eternal dominion over the stars. The revolution began at exactly the same moment across 47 worlds when Resistance cells activated broadcasting equipment hidden in mining stations, commercial facilities, and research outposts to transmit Alliance historical records directly into planetary communication networks before Council sensors could react. Dr. Nina Walsh had spent months preparing the data packages to be compatible with each species' cultural understanding and linguistic patterns, so that when factory workers on Tau Ceti heard the transmissions, they immediately recognized descriptions of their ancestors as master craftsmen who had created works of art from metal and crystal. The revelation hit the industrial workers like lightning when they learned that their people had once been renowned throughout the galaxy for their artistic achievements, but the Council had genetically modified them to find satisfaction only in mass production and to lose interest in creative expression. Similar awakenings occurred on research stations throughout Council space, as scientists discovered that their predecessors had achieved technologies the Council deliberately suppressed to maintain dependency, with each species having been assigned narrow specializations that prevented them from developing comprehensive knowledge. Admiral Helen Brooks coordinated the military aspects of the operation from her command center on Earth, as reports flooded in about Council fleet units defecting when their crews learned that the warrior codes they lived by were corrupted versions of Alliance honor traditions. The Hegemony battle group stationed at Wolf 359 was the first major unit to switch sides when Commander Keth Sorvalan shared Inquisitor Malachar's findings with his officers, and they realized that their genetic conditioning to serve the Council was a form of slavery rather than noble duty. Engineer Pete Williams activated ancient Alliance defense systems that had been hidden throughout the galaxy for thousands of years as automated stations emerged from asteroid fields and planetary rings to broadcast the true history directly into every inhabited system, making censorship impossible. The Council's response came swiftly. As Operation Silent Truth was launched with orders to destroy all Alliance artifacts and eliminate Resistance leaders before the revolution could spread further. But their forces found themselves facing opponents who knew the truth about Council tactics and weaknesses. Kelly Murphy barely escaped capture on Proxima Station when Council security forces raided the underground network she had built, but she managed to transmit critical intelligence about triumvirate military deployments to Resistance commanders before disappearing into the station's maintenance tunnels. The battle for public opinion was won when Alliance broadcasting stations began transmitting footage from Council detention facilities where prisoners were subjected to genetic modification procedures designed to make them more compliant and less capable of independent thought. Inquisitor Vex Malachar made the decision that would define his future when Dr. Carl Jensen's research team was surrounded by Council forces, and instead of arresting them, he ordered his troops to protect the humans while they evacuated irreplaceable Alliance historical data. His defection provided the Resistance with detailed intelligence about Council security systems and military codes that allowed them to coordinate attacks on key facilities while avoiding heavily defended positions. The revolution reached a turning point when entire Council fleets began refusing orders to fire on civilian populations, as crews learned that their warrior traditions had been manipulated to serve tyrannical rulers rather than protecting innocent beings. Captain Jake Morrison led a combined human and alien task force to secure the Alliance archive on Kepler 438, while Council loyalist forces attempted to destroy it, but they arrived to find ancient automated defenses protecting the facility from intruders. The archive contained the complete genetic templates for every species that had been modified by the Council, along with detailed records of triumvirate war, crimes spanning thousands of years providing legal justification for removing them from power. Dr. Lisa Carter coordinated with xenobiologists throughout the Resistance network to analyze the genetic data and develop procedures for reversing Council modifications that had suppressed natural abilities and cultural traits in conquered species. The most shocking discovery was that the triumvirate themselves were artificial beings, created by the original 3 Alliance species who had betrayed their democratic principles and merged their consciousnesses into immortal machine bodies to rule forever. This revelation explained why Council technology seemed designed to control rather than liberate, and why the triumvirate had spent millennia eliminating any trace of Alliance democratic principles that threatened their eternal dominion. Pete Williams led teams of engineers in adapting Alliance technologies to create weapons and defensive systems that could challenge Council military superiority while maintaining the cooperative principles that had made the original Alliance successful. The tide of war shifted when Resistance forces activated the Alliance's ultimate defensive system, a network of automated stations that could project energy shields around entire star systems, while broadcasting democratic principles to any being within range. Council forces found themselves unable to attack Resistance strongholds, while their own crews were being constantly exposed to Alliance educational broadcasts that revealed the truth about their history and the crimes committed in their names. Admiral Helen Brooks realized that victory was within reach when intelligence reports showed that Council member species were declaring independence throughout the galaxy as populations learned about their true heritage and rejected triumvirate authority. The final battle began when the triumvirate decided to destroy Earth rather than allow human democratic ideals to continue spreading, and they deployed their most powerful warships in a desperate attempt to eliminate the source of the revolution. The attack on Earth's solar system lasted 18 hours as Council forces tried to break through defensive shields generated by Alliance stations that had been hidden in the asteroid belt for millennia, waiting for the day when humanity would need protection. The battle was won when ancient Alliance vessels that had been dormant in deep space for thousands of years activated in response to the crisis and arrived to defend humanity with weapons and shields that made Council technology look primitive by comparison. The sight of Alliance ships emerging from hyperspace with their elegant flowing designs and rainbow energy fields convinced even the most loyal Council forces that they had been serving the wrong side in a conflict that had lasted far longer than anyone had imagined. Council Admiral Vorthak surrendered his entire fleet when he recognized the lead Alliance vessel as the flagship of his own ancestors who had been supposedly destroyed in ancient conflicts, but who had actually been waiting in exile for the chance to return home. The fall of the triumvirate came not through military defeat, but through abandonment, as their supporters realized they had been serving artificial beings who cared nothing for the species they claimed to protect, and who had spent millennia committing genocide against their own people. Inquisitor Malachar broadcast the final message that ended the war when he revealed the location of the triumvirate's hidden fortress and provided access codes that allowed Alliance forces to shut down the systems that had maintained their artificial immortality. The galaxy watched as 3 ancient machines that had once been living beings finally died after thousands of years of unnatural existence, leaving behind a power vacuum that could only be filled by the democratic principles they had tried so hard to destroy. In the aftermath of victory, humanity found itself at the center of a galactic transformation as species throughout known space began the long process of recovering their true identities and rebuilding civilizations that had been suppressed for millennia. 6 months after the fall of the triumvirate, delegates from 47 species gathered on the restored capital world of Kepler 438b for the Reconstruction Convention, where Captain Jake Morrison found himself representing humanity in discussions that would shape galactic civilization for generations to come. The planet had been transformed from a barren council penal colony back into the garden world. It had been during the original alliance with automated terraforming systems, reactivating ancient atmospheric processors and awakening dormant ecosystems that had survived millennia of suppression. Dr. Lisa Carter headed the Historical Truth Commission, working with scholars from every liberated species to piece together accurate records of pre-council civilizations and ensure that the crimes of the triumvirate would never be forgotten or repeated by future generations. The Commission's work revealed the staggering scope of cultural destruction that had been carried out over thousands of years, with entire languages eliminated, scientific discoveries suppressed, and artistic traditions reduced to crude imitations that served council propaganda purposes. Engineer Pete Williams led the Technology Sharing Initiative, helping species recover suppressed innovations while developing new cooperative research frameworks based on alliance principles of open knowledge exchange rather than the hoarding and control that had characterized council science. The Technology Recovery Program discovered that many supposedly primitive species had actually possessed advanced capabilities that the council had deliberately suppressed through genetic modification and educational manipulation designed to make them forget their own achievements. Former Inquisitor Vex Malachar, who now used his birth name of Keth Sorvalan, worked with justice committees to establish fair procedures for dealing with council collaborators while ensuring that the focus remained on rehabilitation and truth-telling rather than revenge. The justice system they developed emphasized understanding how individuals had been manipulated by council conditioning rather than simply punishing them for actions they had been programmed to perform against their true nature. Admiral Helen Brooks oversaw the integration of various military forces into a true peacekeeping organization designed to protect member worlds from external threats and natural disasters rather than maintaining the conquest fleets that had enforced council tyranny. The new military doctrine emphasized cooperation between species with different strengths working together to solve problems, rather than the hierarchical command structures that had made council forces effective at oppression, but terrible at actual protection. Dr. Nina Walsh established the Alliance Education Initiative, ensuring that accurate history and democratic principles would be taught throughout member worlds with emphasis on critical thinking and cultural preservation, to prevent future authoritarian manipulation. The education program included mandatory courses on recognizing propaganda techniques and understanding how democratic institutions could be corrupted by those who sought power over others, rather than service to their communities. The reconstruction process faced its greatest challenge when delegates had to decide how to handle species that had been so heavily modified by council genetic engineering that they could not survive without artificials. Support systems. Dr. Carl Jensen worked with medical teams to develop transition procedures that would allow modified species to gradually recover their original biological capabilities while maintaining the beneficial adaptations they had gained. During their time under council rule, the most complex case involved the hegemony warriors who had been transformed from peaceful scholars into aggressive enforcers and who struggled to find their place in a galaxy that no longer needed their violent skills. Keth Sorvalan became an advocate for his people, arguing that hegemony warriors could be retrained as peacekeepers and teachers who would use their understanding of violence to help others avoid the conflicts that had plagued galactic civilization for so long. The economic reconstruction required developing new trade systems based on mutual benefit, rather than the extraction relationships that had allowed the Council to drain resources from conquered worlds while providing minimal compensation. Pete Williams helped design manufacturing networks that would allow each species to contribute their unique capabilities, while ensuring that no single group could dominate others through control of essential resources or technologies. The political structure that emerged incorporated lessons from both the original alliance's collapse and humanity's own democratic experiments, with built-in safeguards against the concentration of power that had allowed the triumvirate to seize control. Jake Morrison participated in debates about representation and decision-making that lasted for weeks as delegates worked to create systems that would protect minority rights while allowing majority rule and preventing gridlock that could be exploited by future tyrants. The new constitution included provisions for regular review and amendment to ensure that the government could adapt to changing circumstances without becoming rigid or falling prey to those who would exploit stability for their own purposes. Kelly Murphy established intelligence services dedicated to identifying and countering attempts to recreate authoritarian control, while ensuring that surveillance capabilities could not be turned against the very citizens they were supposed to protect. The early years of the Second Alliance faced challenges from refugee populations who had been traumatized by centuries of oppression and who struggled to trust any form of government, even one based on democratic principles. Lisa Carter worked with psychologists and social workers to develop healing programs that helped former council subjects overcome conditioning that had taught them to fear independence and to accept that they deserved freedom and self-determination. The Alliance's first major test came when long-range sensors detected signals from other galaxies, suggesting that the triumvirate had been part of a larger network of tyrannical civilizations that controlled vast regions of space. Admiral Brooks prepared defensive strategies while Jake Morrison advocated for sending diplomatic missions to make contact with resistance movements that might exist in other galaxies under similar oppression. The decision to reach beyond their own galaxy represented the ultimate expression of Alliance principles, as members chose to risk their hard-won freedom to help others achieve liberation from tyranny. Dr. Ryan Clark led the development of new starship designs that incorporated the best of Alliance and human technology, creating vessels capable of the long journeys required for intergalactic exploration and contact. The launch of the first intergalactic mission was celebrated throughout Alliance space, as Captain Jake Morrison took command of the newly constructed vessel Unity with a crew representing 23 different species working together as equals. Amy Rodriguez served as communications officer on the Unity, using her experience with alien contact protocols to develop methods for reaching out to oppressed populations in distant galaxies without alerting their rulers to Alliance intervention. The mission departed from Kepler 438b, carrying copies of Alliance historical records and technological specifications that could help other civilizations break free from similar tyrannical controls. The Unity disappeared into the void between galaxies. Children from dozens of species played together in the restored gardens of the Alliance capital, their laughter echoing across courtyards where their ancestors had once planned the democratic federation that tyranny could not permanently destroy. The final reports from the Unity before it passed beyond communication range indicated successful contact with resistance. Movements in 3 separate galaxies proving that the human ideals of liberty and cooperation were indeed universal concepts that no amount of oppression could eliminate forever. The Second Alliance had become more than a government or even a civilization, but rather a beacon of hope that would continue spreading freedom throughout the universe, one world at a time, until every being in creation had the chance to determine their own destiny among the stars. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES horizon, watching the stars drift past through the main viewing screen, when his communications officer Amy Rodriguez called out from her station with excitement in her voice that something big was coming through on the long-range sensors. The horizon was 3 months into a routine exploration mission in the Kepler 442 system when they found it floating alone in the cold darkness between the 3rd and 4th planets like a sleeping giant, waiting to be awakened after countless years of silence. Dr. Lisa Carter was the first to see the detailed scans when they came through, and she nearly dropped her coffee mug when the images appeared on her screen, because what they showed was impossible, according to everything they knew about galactic history. The structure was massive beyond anything humans had ever built, and far larger than any known alien construction, with smooth, curved walls that seemed to flow like water frozen in time, and materials that their scanners could not identify despite having databases filled with information about every known species in the Galactic Council. Engineer Pete Williams ran the technical analysis and found that the station was still drawing power from some unknown source, even though it appeared to have been abandoned for thousands of years, which should have been impossible since no known technology could maintain itself for so long without regular maintenance. Jake made the decision to dock with the structure, despite regulations that required him to report such discoveries immediately to Council authorities. But something about the way it hung there in space made him think that this was bigger than standard protocol, and that humanity might need to understand what they had found before anyone else got involved. The docking process took 6 hours because their equipment was not designed to interface with the alien ports, but Pete managed to create a sealed connection, using human engineering and what he called creative problem-solving, that made the alien crew members shake their heads in confusion at how humans could make incompatible systems work together. Lisa led the first exploration team aboard the station, wearing full environmental suits because they had no idea what kind of atmosphere or dangers might be waiting inside. But when they passed through the airlock, they found breathable air and comfortable temperature, as if the station had been expecting visitors. The corridors were wide enough for creatures much larger than humans, with walls covered in symbols that looked like no writing system in any of their databases, and lighting that seemed to come from the walls themselves without any visible source or controls. Amy stayed on the ship monitoring communications and discovered that the station was sending out a very faint signal on frequencies that the Galactic Council had declared off-limits to all member species without explanation. And when she tried to decode the signal, she found patterns that seemed almost familiar, like something she had heard before but could not quite remember. Pete found the main computer core after following power conduits for 2 hours through passages that twisted and turned in ways that hurt his head to think about, and when he finally reached the central chamber, he stood looking at technology that was so advanced it made human computers look like stone tools. The data storage system was unlike anything in Council databases, with crystalline matrices that held information in ways that seemed to bend the normal rules of physics, and when Pete tried to interface with it using standard protocols, nothing happened until he stopped thinking like an engineer and started approaching it like a puzzle that needed human intuition. To solve, Lisa discovered what appeared to be historical records written in multiple languages, including some that matched fragments found in ancient human ruins on Earth, which should have been impossible since humans had only been in space for 200 years and had never encountered these symbols before making contact with the Council. The records spoke of something called the First Galactic Alliance, in terms that suggested it had been a real government that ruled most of the galaxy for thousands of years before disappearing from history, leaving only scattered ruins and half-remembered legends that most species dismissed as mythology. Amy intercepted encrypted transmissions between several Council ships that had suddenly appeared at the edge of the system, and when she managed to break their codes, she found orders to secure any artifacts from pre-Council civilizations and eliminate anyone who might have seen them first. Jake realized they were in serious trouble when he read Amy's report, because it meant that the Council had been actively hiding the existence of previous galactic civilizations, and that finding this station had put his crew in danger from forces they did not understand. Pete managed to download massive amounts of data from the station's computers by treating the interface like a conversation instead of a data transfer, and letting his instincts guide him through security systems that seemed designed to test the user's intentions rather than their technical knowledge. The downloaded files contained star maps showing the locations of hundreds of similar stations throughout the galaxy, along with what appeared to be historical records detailing the rise and fall of the First Alliance in language that became clearer the more they read, as if the text was adapting itself to their understanding. Lisa found evidence that the Alliance had been a democratic federation of dozens of species working together for mutual benefit and protection, but that it had been destroyed by internal betrayal rather than external conquest, with the betrayers taking control and rewriting history to hide their crimes. Amy detected Council enforcement ships moving into attack positions around the horizon, and realized they only had minutes before being boarded by troops, who would confiscate all their findings and probably arrest the entire crew for violating regulations they had not known existed. Jake made the hardest decision of his career when he ordered Pete to copy all the data to hidden storage devices while he prepared to surrender the station to Council forces and pretend they had found nothing of importance, hoping that human acting skills would be enough to fool alien interrogators. The plan worked better than expected, because the Council troops seemed more interested in securing the station than questioning the human crew, and after 12 hours of searches and interviews, they were released with warnings about entering restricted space without proper authorization. As the horizon headed back toward Earth, Jake looked at the hidden data storage devices and wondered what secrets they contained that were worth killing for, and whether humanity was strong enough to handle the truth about galactic history that others had spent millennia trying to hide. Pete quietly began analyzing the copied files during their journey home and found references to technologies that could revolutionize human civilization, along with warnings about species that could not be trusted, and evidence of crimes that made the worst human dictators look like children playing games. Amy continued monitoring Council communications and noticed increased chatter about security protocols and ancient artifacts, which suggested that finding the station had triggered something much larger than a simple archaeological discovery, and that humanity might have accidentally stepped into a galactic conspiracy thousands of years in the making. The Horizon reached Earth 3 weeks later, carrying secrets that would change everything humans thought they knew about their place in the galaxy and the true nature of the forces that controlled the stars.